Hey guys, welcome to our amazing April meeting. I'm really excited for our speaker today, which is Dominick Quartuccio. Dominick and I met in a car heading to a hotel for my company meeting and had a really fun discussion because we were talking about Tony Robbins and I found out he was also a Tony Robbins person, which is awesome. I'm actually going to make sure his video is spotlighted here so you guys can see him. And so his face is recorded with his beautiful phallic shaped microphone here, which is very appropriate for our discussion. So for those who don't know, Dominick's passion is helping men discover and live the greatest version of themselves. He's an international speaker, author of the book Design Your Future, and a leader of men who are doing inner work to becoming better leaders, parents, and lovers. He also co-hosts the Great Man Within podcast and runs the Great Man Mastermind, a community of high caliber and high character men living their greatest purpose. You may have seen him on NPR, read about him in the New York Times, or seen his TEDx talk, The Bold Journey Women Want Men to Take. He's with us today, and I'm going to let Dominick introduce himself the rest of the way while I also make him the host here. So take it away, Dominick. It's all yours. And just as Monica mentioned, if you have questions throughout this, please just write them into the chat. I'll pick them up, and I will ask Dominick the questions as we go along, or we'll have Q&A time at the end, however he wants to do it. But this way we don't have everyone talking over each other and it doesn't get crazy. So thanks so much for being here, Dominick. We're so grateful, and like everyone is so excited to hear this topic.
Awesome. Thanks, Veronica. And everyone, welcome to your 27th Zoom call of the day. Hopefully this will be your last and your best one. And I am sharing my screen right now. So I just want to get a confirmation that you can see my slides, Veronica. We're good to go? Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Before we get started, it's interesting. I feel like I can speak on behalf of most heterosexual men where I say that I've spent an inordinate amount of my life's energy trying to become more attractive to women, right? Like I didn't know how to dress when I was younger. I was like the proverbial black belt and brown shoes, or I would match plaid and stripes. Like I was kind of a disaster with that stuff. And I learned a lot of the things that I learned so I could become more attractive to women. And then as soon as I started doing these conversations about sex and sexuality directed towards men, and I'd have conversations specifically about porn and masturbation and sexual performance, 70% of the audience always turned up to be women. So it's like, as soon as I started to do things specifically for men, it was like, that's when the women showed up. And I'm like, women always continuing to teach me and confound me at the same time. So tonight's conversation is really going to be a frank and open dialogue about some of the things that I've learned about cultivating the wisdom of the brain between my legs, and for men as well. And I want to give you a real lens into the world of how men are thinking and what our desires and fears are and insecurities are around sex and sexuality, at least through the work that I've discovered, the path that I've chosen and the work that I've discovered. So I think the best place to start would be with a quote from our good friend, our late great Robin Williams. And I know Tony talks a lot about Robin. At least the UPW I went to, he told a pretty long story about Robin. Robin always had a way to get to the bottom of things. He said, the problem is God gives men a brain and a penis and only enough blood to run one at a time. And I think that there's probably plenty of evidence from my lifetime that would support this quote. And I think there are plenty of men who can relate to this, and also plenty of women who probably say, yes, that sounds true. Like when a guy's thinking with his dick, he's probably not thinking with his brain. One's on, one's off at the same time. And I think this is funny. And I definitely know that there's evidence in my life where that's true. But I also think on a deeper level, this is not helpful. I actually think that it perpetuates a social narrative that is old, tired, and men can hold ourselves to a higher standard. We're actually quite capable of a lot more. And when I started to listen to some of the signs that I received from my body and from my dick and from my sexuality, I started to learn that there was a lot of stuff there that I hadn't been listening to. And that in fact, like a big source of my wisdom came from that part of me. So tonight, really what we're going to be hitting on, and this is just the pre-planned stuff. I'm totally cool if like a whole conversation thread decides to open up and we want to go down a completely different path, but I got this prepared for you and we could see where the energy of this group takes us. Tonight's plan is to start to share the 3 forces that shape a man's sexuality from an early age. And I think a lot of these, and when I've spoken to women, are also quite applicable, like the 3 areas at an early age that shape our sexuality for most of our lives. Why sex is not a performance, guys. Like, you know, men talk about sex as a performance, where often women don't use the same language and terminology, and how that shows up in connection and in the bedroom, and why we block better, deeper, more intimate, more exciting moments because we think about sex as a performance. A conversation around how to create sexual magnetism, especially while we're in the COVID era, but primarily outside of it as well. And then I'll leave you with 4 book recommendations that have influenced my journey around learning how to empower myself sexually speaking, and what I teach other men in the work that I do. And then finally, I've got a free giveaway at the end, which is a PDF. It's called 5 Ways to Last Longer in Bed. And of course, the men on this Zoom do not need it. So in case you have a friend who needs the 5 Ways to Last Longer in Bed PDF, this is something that you could give to them as a free download. So one of your buddies may need it. Okay. So I just wanted to introduce myself and tell you that I'm Dominick, and I don't talk about sex for a living. Like this is not what I do. I actually spent 15 years in an ultra conservative industry, which was financial services, where sex talk was generally frowned upon. Didn't talk about it much. And I don't know about you, but I grew up with a very loving family who also happened to be quite conservative. And sex talk was also generally frowned upon. We didn't talk about it in my household. It made everyone very uncomfortable. I remember on Friday nights, we would have movie night as a family. And it was simultaneously like the most exciting night and also the most terrifying night, because if we'd be watching a PG rated movie and then all of a sudden, like the man and the woman would start kissing and the woman's top would come off, my parents would lunge across the couch and be like, no, and they try to cover my eyes. Like it was like this. And then for the next 10 minutes, they were just so angry and frustrated that like something sexually suggestive popped up on the screen, and you could cut the tension with a knife in the room, right? It was like, it felt horrible at the same time that I felt like a sexual desire and drive burning in my body. So it was one of the first lessons I learned, and this was an unconscious lesson was that my sexuality wasn't okay. Like these feelings that I felt weren't okay because the initial reaction was just so over the top and it was so upsetting. And that also started to play out as I grew up and spent 6 or 7 years in Catholic school. And my experience in Catholic school was one where I was taught that any kind of sex or sexual fantasy outside of being married was considered sinful. It was something that like really kind of set me back in that way. And from a very early age, sex was something that was always taboo. My feelings, even when they were really strong, and as I started to discover them early on, it was basically like not welcome here. And I just would love to kind of, maybe if you could just drop in the chat box for me right now. I want to know if you could like relate to that. Like if you can just kind of tell me, was yours similar or different? Was your household open, or was your household like, let's not talk about it? Or was it openly like oppressive? Let's not talk about it. I just want to kind of get a little bit of a calibration for, what's going on here. Yeah. Ditto. Totally taboo. Catholic guilt, Catholic girl here. Yeah. All the ways to avoid sex. Yeah. Are you allowed to be, everyone's allowed to be totally open here, because I'm going to be totally open. Sex is bad, wrong, evil. We don't talk about it. So at the best, it sounded like it's just a topic that we don't talk about. And at the worst, it was something that's like taboo, right? So we're going to get into like how that affects how we show up in our sexual relationships with ourselves and with our partners over the course of our lifetime. So yeah, please keep those coming in. Okay. So what I really do for a living is like, I do keynote speaking to high performing organizations and really conservative environments. And that's how I met Veronica. And like the bottom left picture was where I spoke at Cap Trust. That's where I met Veronica. That's what I do for a day job and a living. And I've actually lost some really significant, lucrative keynote speaking contracts as a result of speaking openly about this stuff. Actually, I lost a contract with the largest global asset manager, which was my biggest speaking contract because of doing this work. But I find it to be so important that that this is a path that I'm willing to take. I'm not willing to not address these conversations anymore. See, these are some of the books that I've written, like Design Your Future, On Purpose Leadership, about charting a course of life that, you know, is ideal for you. And like Veronica mentioned, like the heart of my work is helping men to tap into and live the best version of themselves. Guys who are publicly successful, but publicly decorated, but privately confused about why their lives don't feel better. And one of the areas they tend to be confused about is like why their sex drive, why their libido has dropped, why their fire for life doesn't feel the same way at 40 and 50 as it did in their 20s. And many guys write this off as, I'm just getting older, when that's fucking bullshit. It's just really like we've been sold a bag of goods about what happens to our bodies over the course of our life. And for men, our fire, our passion can hit an all-time high in our 40s, in our 50s, if we understand how to tap into this parts of ourselves, the wisdom of the brain between our legs. And so this is primarily the work that I do. But about a couple of years ago, my mentor, this is Lisa O'Neill. I have a crazy mentor who has crazy ideas. When she started hearing some of the stuff I was talking about privately with men around sex and sexuality, lighting up sex lives, lasting longer in bed, making deeper connections with their intimate partners, feeling more connected and less guilty and shameful about their secret sexual behaviors or their sexual desires and fantasies with their partners. When she started hearing me talk about this, she had this crazy idea. She was like, hey, Dominick, you need to talk publicly to men about this sex stuff. Flying completely in the face of everything I've ever learned from my Catholic upbringing, from my family, from work. So she's telling me you need to go out there and do it. And not only that, she suggested that I should call this public forum where I talk about sex the Discerning Dick. She said I should call this thing the Discerning Dick, Sexual Wisdom for the Modern Man. And Lisa, she's a renegade, she's a rebel, and she's never steered me wrong. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna go do that. And I think it was at the end of 2018, I decided to do my very first event called the Discerning Dick, Sexual Wisdom for the Modern Man. And I did them at the Assemblage, which is a beautiful co-working facility in New York City. This was one of the first ones, but we generally got like 70, 80, 90 people to come to these things. It was really, really powerful. And then something funny happened. All of a sudden, this stuff about the Discerning Dick caught the eye of the New York Times. And then they wrote an article where I was like the lead feature in that. And then the NPR found out about it, and they decided to bring me on their longest running radio show called All Things Considered to talk with Emily Nagoski, who's like a world-renowned sex educator at the University of Indiana. And she has a number of New York Times bestsellers and a few TED Talks. And this is one of my claims to fame. They referenced the Discerning Dick on NPR. And I found out from the producer that it was the first time in the history of NPR that they used the word dick not to refer to a man's name. So that's going down on my resume as one of my all-time greatest accomplishments. And so what that taught me was that like these conversations are now starting to go even more mainstream. It was the first time NPR ever did a multi-part series on sex and sexuality. So I think the time is ripe, especially for men, to have better conversations about sex. So let me just pause here for a moment. Yeah, thank you. Great. Okay, I was just looking at the chat box. So why don't I get a little bit personal with you? You know, I wanna share with you one of the stories that really kind of caught fire when we were doing some of these Discerning Dick events over the last few years. The year was 1992. Okay. And my life was about to change forever. Okay, I was 14 years old, the age of 1992. And that was the year that the movie White Men Can't Jump came out. Okay. Now, what you may not remember about White Men Can't Jump is that Rosie Perez was in this movie, okay? And my parents were not in the habit of leaving rated R movies unattended in the house with me by myself. But one day they got sloppy. They left me at home alone. It was like, I don't know, 4 o'clock on an afternoon. And they were both gone, and I had the house to myself. And the VHS cassette tape, White Men Can't Jump, was just sitting there. And I popped that thing in the VCR. I sit down on the couch, and I started watching the movie. And midway through the movie, there's a sex scene between Rosie Perez and Woody Harrelson. So I'm sitting on the couch, and I want to paint the picture for you. I've got this like old school VCR remote where I'm pushing play, I'm watching the sex scene, and then I rewind, and then I press play, and I just keep going back and forth over these same 30 seconds. And I remember that I was wearing like these blue sweatpants. Right? And after I was watching this enough times, I started getting a boner. Now, I knew what boners were. I'd had boners for, I think, a few years at that point. And all of a sudden, I just found myself unconsciously rewinding and winding and using the remote to rub the boner through my blue sweatpants as I was watching Rosie Perez. VCR remote, blue sweatpants, Rosie Perez, rewind, play, rewind, play, rewind, play. And then all of a sudden, something shifted in my body where it was like the force of a New York City fire truck barreling down Broadway. And then all of a sudden I blacked out, and then it was like, boom, boom, boom. And when I came to, I don't know how many seconds later, my blue sweatpants were completely destroyed. There was like a big wet spot, and I had no idea what had just happened. Absolutely no idea. It felt amazing, and I was actually horrified after it was over. I quickly rewound the tape. I'm going to push pause on that. I quickly rewound the tape, and I put it back in a VHS tape. I ran upstairs. I threw my blue sweatpants behind the bed, and I jumped in the bathtub, and I was like, what the hell just happened to me? That was amazing. I want to feel that again. And because I'm 14 years old, 3 seconds later, I could feel that again, right? I went right back into the action. And that was when I discovered masturbation. I had no idea what it was. I'd never heard about it. I'd never talked to anybody about it. And I was 14 years old. And what ended up happening was I had just learned that like I was sitting on top of this free supply of what could be otherwise considered heroin, this amazing feeling that I could use. I could pull on this crank at any point in time, and I could just like take myself away from all of the stresses of 7th grade or 8th grade or whatever grade I was in. And I was a highly sensitive kid. Any feelings of overwhelm or stress or social peer pressure, anytime I wanted to, I could pull on that crank and be taken away. And what ended up happening over the course of the next few decades was unconsciously, I conditioned myself to use self-stimulation and sexuality and these private sexual moments to escape anxiety, to jump away from feelings of loneliness or depression. And I didn't have words for that. I conflated my sexuality with being wrong, being bad, being a sinful kid. All of those things were wrapped up in my sexuality. And when you're a kid who's cranking it out a few times a day, that's a lot of repetitions. That's a lot of anchoring a certain behavior in. And it's only, it was only for, well, actually, I think it was 6 years. I was a virgin until I was the age of 20 when I went off to college. For 6 years, I was practicing sexuality in this way by myself, right? All of those thousands of repetitions by myself before another human being entered the picture, really, where I would engage with someone sexually. And what I found was a lot of guys had the same kind of experience where it was a lot of stumbling around, figuring things out on their own, not knowing what was happening, and then all of a sudden being thrust into an experience with another human being after thousands of repetitions in many cases by yourself. And that causes all sorts of problems. So let's just pause here for a second. I want to ask the men in the room here, I want the men only to respond to this question. What age did you first discover masturbation? And if you're not comfortable answering this question in the chat box, that's totally okay. But for the guys here, at what age did you discover for the first time masturbation, if you can remember? You know, and for me, I was 14. And I'm going to share with you some stuff that I learned from doing a poll of 50 men. Yeah, we have 12, 11 or 12. If there's a few other guys here who haven't weighed in yet, please do. Yeah, 12 seems to be the magic age. 13. Yeah, so if you think about how young that is, right? And it looks like the guys who are responding here, for the most part, are either, 30s to 50s. If you can imagine kids who are 10, 11, 12, 13 now, who have access to high-speed internet and phones. There's a book that I'm going to recommend at the end of this, which is called Boys and Sex, written by Peggy Orenstein, who's a New York Times bestselling author. She released a book in January of this year. It just became a New York Times bestseller. She said that most boys at this age, in this era, for the first time see porn at the age of 8 or 9. Most boys, and they don't actively seek it. It's usually an older brother, an older sibling, or a friend, the kid at school who's the first, and then, shows them the phone. And then it's usually around like 11 or 12 where they first do their first searches online, typically like boobies or something like that, like something, pretty innocent. But then, the rabbit hole goes down from there. And so what ends up happening for most guys is we just kind of go about this on our own for decades, where we never have like a meaningful conversation with anyone about our sexuality. So check this out. And gentlemen, thank you for sharing your answers here, right? I decided to do a masturbation survey. I hope you enjoy my use of emojis. This was not a highly scientific survey, but I went out to 50 men that were in my community in different parts and walks of life. So I surveyed 50 men between the ages of 22 and 50. The average age was 37. This is the breakdown of demographic, primarily white, not exactly the most diverse group, but you can see there was, a bit of a breakdown here. And I asked them 4 questions. I said, guys, how old were you when you first learned to masturbate? And how did you learn? Did like someone teach you? Was it a class at school? What are 3 words that you used to describe your very first orgasm? This was really fascinating. I'm going to show you a word cloud in a few minutes here. So what are 3 words that you would use to describe that first orgasm as you remember it? And then describe how that first experience went down, which is where guys can get really funny. And I've got some quotes for you from there. So here's what I ended up learning. 84% of those 50 men first started between the ages of 10 to 14. There were some outliers. I would say most of the others were younger. There was like one, I think, guy who was maybe over the age of 14. So if you look at like where we fall in, we're directly in that category. I think almost everybody except for one who's 15 or something like that fell right into the middle of this category. I was 14, which was, I guess, a late bloomer based on this group. 72% of guys figured this out on their own by accident. And we normalize that. We're like, oh, okay, that's normal, like because we don't talk about sex. But think about it. Like you're a 10-year-old kid or a 12-year-old kid who stumbles upon masturbation, maybe coupling it with porn at this age, not having anyone to talk to you about what you may be learning from watching porn or what you may be fantasizing about or what your body may be doing, what you're conditioning yourself for. 12-year-olds are left to run amok with this very potent force between their legs, right? That's a problem because we carry that forward into our teenage years, into our relationships, everywhere. And 19% of them said that a friend or a family member told them. And some of these actually weren't in the most nurturing of ways. Sometimes there was a bit of incest that was involved, as was told. There was only a few of the situations where it was like really educational. So you're talking about the exception, not the norm, the like dramatic exception. Like 1 out of 10 guys actually had an understanding of what the hell he was doing and was taught by someone who gave a shit and who knew how to help him on his path. And so we wonder why so many guys are fucked up with our sexuality. Well, it starts here. So I asked guys, like I said before, what are 3 words that you would use to describe that first sexual experience, that first orgasm that you had to masturbation? And the first answer, this was really interesting. So the first word, I took the first word that each guy put and I put it into a word cloud. Here's what you see. surprise, awesome, weird, awkward, exhilarating, fun, euphoric, best, explosive, holy shit. There was like a lot of, oh my God, this was amazing. That was the first reaction that most guys remember, like, holy shit. And that was like me. It was like, this was the greatest thing ever. But when I got to the third answer, like the third word that I asked men to use to describe what that experience was like, this is where it gets really interesting. Guilt, shame, confused, secret. There are 7 words here. 4 of them are negative. You know, we got enjoyable, fulfilling, awesome. But the other ones are secret, guilt, confused, and shame. And what I started to unpack when I talked to the guys about this was that this was like what they look back on that experience and said, after I finished that, I felt guilty. I felt shameful. I felt confused. I had to keep it a secret. It was like that third word when I asked them that this was what this was the meaning that they made from that first experience. So it felt great, but the meaning that they layered on it was something negative, bad, shameful. And again, that's like something that we carry forward with a very natural part of our existence, our human sexuality is we carried something negative forward. And in a few minutes, I'm going to like pause and start to ask some questions of the group and do some reflections. So if you have questions, you can certainly drop them in the chat box because we're going to come to a little bit of an interlude in a minute to get some of your thoughts. But I thought I would pull some of the quotes from the men who said, you know, when I asked them the question of, well, can you describe how that first experience went down? And this is where guys can be pretty funny. So here are some of my 5 favorite quotes. The first one, as if guided by the hand of God, I went to town. The next guy, it was like I had just discovered a secret doorway in Zelda, which is a time appropriate reference. This was back when Nintendo was big, and I can relate to that. I masturbated using anything I could find: sunscreen, shampoo, moisturizers, pillows, soft blankets, etc. And the rest is history. I've never actually tried soft blankets, so that's always something I could add to my list. I happened to be laying on a pillow, and I then discovered dry humping. So pillows seem to be a big thing for these guys, and I hope I never end up as a house guest in either of these people's homes. And the final one, which I thought was the best, my boner was there, it was hard, and it wouldn't go away, so I did what any rational human being would do, and I tugged on it a few hundred times. So we can have fun with this stuff for sure. And I found that when I'm talking to guys about sexuality, we have to have a forum for fun. Like I actually have to make sure that guys can tell these funny stories and crack jokes so that there's a bit of levity in the room, while at the same time not letting that distract from the deeper conversations that we've never had about this stuff. Our partners, the women in our lives, the men in our lives, whoever we call our significant others, are craving men to go deeper in this arena. But the way that begins is we first need to actually kind of go back in time and look at some of the areas of our lives that help to shape these sexual behaviors and sexual rituals that we've done for so long unconsciously. So I want to hit these 3 and then I'll pause. I just want to give you the 3 childhood forces that shaped and defined most sexuality, most of my sexuality and the men that I speak with. Porn is not included here. It's an entirely different subject that I'm happy to talk ad nauseum about. If you guys have questions about porn, I can go deep on that. But the 3 F's, the 3 childhood forces that shape most of your sexuality, and you've heard me allude to a lot of them already. Your family, right? Like your family household. What was their attitude towards sex? Was it open or closed? Was it taboo? Was it undiscussed? Was it beautified? Was it talked openly about? You know, was it made to be something natural and safe to explore? You know, what did your father teach you? What did your mother teach you? What did your grandparents teach you? I know that in many cases, people who are the survivors of sexual assault, sexual abuse, family members are a part of that. And that can stay with you for long periods of time as well. It could be an entire lifetime, you know. Your faith. What did your faith or lack thereof teach you about sex and sexuality? You know, for me in my Catholic faith, my Catholic upbringing, the church and school that I went to for 7 years, altar boy, it was explicitly taught that sex and fantasy were sinful. And I truly believed on some level that I would go to hell if I had premarital sex. I waited till I was 20 before I broke my virginity, until I was out of the household primarily. And I really want you to know that I waited till I was 20 on my choice, because I truly believed on some level that I would go to hell for having sex and having sex outside of wedlock. And then the final one, and this one's really interesting, is your friends, faith, family, and friends. Some social circles start much younger. Some social circles with guys are really aggressive and obnoxious and violent and disrespectful and misogynistic towards women. Others aren't like that at all. I grew up with a group of guys who we were scared of girls, you know, like and we just, you know, wanted a girl to dance with us at the junior high dance. And that was our thing. And none of us graduated high school with, I think one guy maybe broken his virginity in my group of friends. But some of my other guy friends, you know, and some of the men that I coach, like they were having sex at an early age. For me, masturbation, when I got to public school in 7th grade, the coolest kids in school talked about masturbation as being something that was like, you were a pariah, you were a pervert if you masturbated. So when I discovered masturbation, I discovered masturbation, I thought that I was a pervert. I had to keep it secret. I thought I was wrong. Otherwise I'd be socially ostracized. Other people's groups of friends, it was the cool thing to do, to masturbate, to have sex early, these kinds of things. And those dramatically shape your attitude, what's accepted and what's not, over the course of your life. In Peggy Orenstein's book, Boys and Sex, again, one of the brilliant insights that she brings from that book is boys, when we're talking about sex in those early years, sex is very rarely really about sex. It's much more about power dynamics and social standing, right? Like, what's your body count, right? Have you slept with more girls than the next guy? And that's how you become more powerful, right? Did you masturbate first? Did you find porn? Like, these are actually power plays. It's not really about sex at all. And when those dynamics are set up in your groups of friends, that's what you carry forward. So I would love to pause here and maybe just like open the floor for any questions you might have so far about anything that I've shared. And also, I would love to ask the guys too, to either share a reflection or ask a question that's on your mind right now. And I recognize that it may be difficult to speak up in this forum around that. And if you're not cool with that right now, that's awesome. Like that's totally welcome. One of the pieces of feedback that I got, and I'm buying you some time right now to think about what it is you may want to ask. When I was running these events live in front of large groups, and 60-70% of the audience was women, when I would come to the audience, every time the first people to jump in were women. And then I started getting coaching from women who said, we came here to hear from the guys because guys never talk about this stuff. And we want to know what these guys have to say. So can you make sure that you go to the guys first? So I would love for the men who have a question or a reflection to speak up here now. And then we'll clear some space for any other questions that pop up for the women of this group. Who would like to begin? I bought you all sorts of time, fellas, with that. You know I did. Okay. We'll have it. Oop.
I'll offer some commentary if you'd like.
Please.
So when I was first endeavoring to find out about sex, my group of friends were sexually active and at a really young age. So I actually wasn't ready, but felt pressure. And that's what my first experience wound up taking me to. It was one of my best friends, ex-girlfriends, that liked me and then we wound up getting together. But yeah, I wasn't ready, and I felt like I was too young. I wasn't prepared. And it was an awkward and uncomfortable experience. It wasn't the bliss of, two people coming together. So that was my first take. And then I waited from that point forward almost 2 years before I wanted to do it again.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, man. And can you give me your name, please?
Jeff.
Jeff, thank you for sharing that. And was the 2 years that you waited, was a part of that due to the experience that you had that first time?
That, and also I moved, and when I relocated, then I had to reestablish myself in a new social group.
Yeah. Okay. And if I had to ask you to reflect back, I know hindsight is 2020. That first experience, whatever you said, it wasn't really all that enjoyable for you. Can you look back and see, was there anything that you carried with you from that experience to the next one, whether it was expectation?
Being nervous, I think, just not being comfortable yet in my own skin and finding myself nervous, unsure, a little anxious.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And do you know if that stayed with you in future experiences as well? And if that dissolved, or was that always kind of something that was in the background?
That was in the background for a long time. And
Yeah.
then, I guess so I had a lot of experiences. So then I found myself, kind of modulating my own emotion through expectations of myself. And it's kind of it was a weird mental state. So, sometimes I'd feel like the king, and other times I wasn't as sure of myself. So it would really depend on my situation and my partner at the time.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, man. And Artie, I saw that you had your hand raised. We'll come to you next. Yeah, that's the thing is we have these early sexual experiences. You didn't want to, you weren't ready, but you felt pressure because, you didn't want to be the only one who didn't and be left behind. And then that gets brought into each relationship going forward. And in the background, maybe there's that anxiety, there's that fear. I know that I've spoken to a lot of men whose first experience it was couldn't get it up or popped off too early, then felt ashamed and then brought shame into other environments and then decided, you know what, instead of that, I'm just going to go and masturbate, or I'm going to go watch porn because I don't have to risk that, or the emotional disturbance that comes with that. And then, over the course of weeks, months, years, lifetime, that can become a thing that we don't even recognize that that's our go-to. Oh, are you trying to talk? Let me see here. I'm going to unmute you. You're muted, my friend. I can't seem to unmute you.
That's okay. I was actually just talking to my fiance. We were talking about something else.
Cool.
I'm sorry. I got, I started digressing into something else.
All good, man. Yeah, all good. No, I appreciate you sharing. I want to get to Artie. Artie, what was, I saw that you'd raised your hand. What was your reflection?
Okay. No, you were talking about, the Catholic upbringing, and I remember I was pretty religious as a little kid, I mean, I would go to, catechism. I didn't go to Catholic school, but, we always went to church every Sunday. And I remember when I was 17, I got in the confessional, and the priest starts asking me questions, about, if I've had sex with a woman, with a man, with yourself. And I walked out of there. I mean, I was 17. I mean, I'm old enough to not be totally freaked, but I certainly have not been back to confession since then because it so turned me off. And but you were talking about the Catholic upbringing. That was something I remember that was definitely, I don't know. Maybe it's normal that they do that, but I just thought it was kind of inappropriate. But that was me at the time.
Yeah, was there anything that you felt like you carried with you from that experience, Artie, that affected?
I don't think so. I just thought that was, thought it was a little, strange.
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody else be asked that, and so, and since then I've rarely been to church unless it's been a wedding or a funeral. I just got turned off by it, the whole thing, which maybe, whether that's right or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, you're seeing some of the comments come in here, like, that the priest, it's upsetting for some for, the priest to be asking those questions.
Yeah.
And look, like one thing I want to be very clear about here is, I don't want to sweep every priest, every religious faith, every, there are plenty of amazing people of faith and amazing priests who are doing amazing work. But there's all too many people who have stories and histories that are like run the gamut from what you experienced, Artie, to something much worse.
Right.
And
absolutely.
yeah. And I'm finding that, even in some of the most sexually satisfied adults, there are still lingering issues with how faith has shown up in their early life, hangups, ability to fully express desire, to have sex guilt-free, to feel like enriched. Actually, I'm 41 years old now, and I am still working through alleviating feelings of guilt and shame after I finish masturbating, self-pleasure. It's still something. And I've done about 6 or 7 years worth of inner work around this. It's a long haul because there was always that thing for decades of my life where I was like, I just did something bad. I just did something wrong. And only now am I really starting to reclaim my relationship with my sexuality in a healthy way. And it is fucking powerful. So I want more men to have an opportunity to do that. Artie, thank you. All right. Are there any women who feel compelled to speak up here before we move on to the next section and ask any questions or provide any reflections? Okay. Yeah. Feel free at any point. Okay. Something just popped in here. It's natural. Okay. So I'm going to move on to this next section, which is going to be, this is an opportunity for you to self-reflect. Okay. I'm going to ask you 7 questions to start to get kind of present with how well do you know your sexual, your sexual self? How well do you know your sexual self? I think on some level, we kind of I know what turns me on. I know what gets me off. I know the kind of man or woman that I want. But when we go beyond that, when we go a level deeper, oftentimes there are a lot of questions that we don't know the answers to. So here's 7 questions that you can start to ask yourself. Number 1, have you ever done a sexual inventory? Do you know what a sexual inventory is? A sexual inventory is doing something similar to what we just did, which is kind of going back to your younger years. When was the first time you remember having a sexual feeling? My first time was discovering the Playboy in my parents' basement at the age of 8. Holy shit, this is what a naked woman looks like. How did you know that you were straight? How did you know that you were gay? Do you remember your first sexual experiences? Do you remember your first time feeling sexually weird? Do you remember the escalation events of maybe kissing someone to moving to masturbation, to moving to sex? Have you actually gone through and done the chronology of your life? The highs, the lows, the dips, the peaks, the valleys. Have you gone through and taken a look at how your faith, your family, and friends have affected your desires, your fears, your insecurities, your attitude towards sex? This is one of the most powerful exercises you can do. And I lead a number of men through this exercise of going back in time to their first experiences, and then a chronology of what are the significant events that created your sexuality. I would highly encourage you, if you're down for this, to take this away and do this exercise on your own. It's powerful and illuminating. If you also have a spouse or a partner, I'd encourage you to do them separately first and then come together and create a safe space where you can share that together. Have you ever written down a list of your peak sexual experiences and identified them? Peak sexual experiences is a term that comes from a book that I'm also recommending at the end here called The Erotic Mind by Dr. Jack Morin. One of the most powerful, insightful, healing books I've ever read. He's a doctor of sexuality, and it took him 12 years to write the book. It is so comprehensive. I wish everybody would read it. And one of the key concepts in there he talks about is, do you know what your peak sexual experiences are? Write them down. Think about that fantasy, that time, that hot sex, that spontaneous sex, or that time that I just can't get out of my mind, or maybe that thing I fantasize about that maybe there's a little bit of taboo around. Probably those aren't too far. You don't have to think too far about those peak sexual experiences. And once you have a chance to write them down, you can start to see some of the themes. Like, are these sexual experiences with total strangers? Are these experiences where you're the submissive one? Maybe you're dominant in your walking life, but these are like, submissive experiences. Are these experiences where they're with an intimate partner? Are they spontaneous? Are they in public places? Once you get a list of your peak sexual experiences, you can really start to understand your core erotic template, as he would call it in the book. And once you understand your core erotic template, you can start to understand the things that really turn you on. And if you know that about yourself, that's also something super powerful that you can communicate to your partner. Do you have secrets, fantasies, behaviors, and desires that you are afraid to share? Do you have secrets, which are fantasies, behaviors, desires that you're afraid to share? In my work with men, so the answer to this is for many people, absolutely. And these secrets, these fantasies, we may spend a lot of time and energy getting those needs met in private, whether it's like, porn, whether it's stepping out on a relationship, whether it's through casual sex that we don't think we can get in an intimate relationship because we don't think that our partner is ready to hear it, or we're afraid to ask, or fearing rejection. And I'm finding that with, that with men, in my deeper work with men, I'm sure women, I know women through like a lot of women coaches who are sex coaches, that they share this with me too, but I can't speak from firsthand experience. So I'm not gonna blanket statement this to women, but men, a lot of us have secrets, fantasies, behaviors, and desires that we're afraid to share because we're afraid of rejection. And when we don't know how to communicate our sexual desires, or if we're made to feel like they're weird, or if there's some religious hang up around it, then what ends up happening is we end up getting those needs met somewhere. We suppress for a while, but then we'll go and fantasize. Then we'll go and find the porn, and we'll never learn how to express that to our partners. And then we create the barrier between us and intimacy with someone else. Question number 4, and this is primarily directed towards men, but women, obviously, like this could be relevant to you too. Do you wish you watched less porn but can't seem to stop? And more men than not say yes to this question. Not every guy. Many guys don't have problems with porn. But do you wish you watched less porn and you can't figure out why you can't stop? And what I found is that there's a number of reasons that this happens. We unconsciously create these porn habits where it's like, it's quick, it's efficient, I get to watch what I like, I don't have to worry about rejection, cleanup's done, and I can get back to my life, right? Especially when like guys are managing businesses and families and there's no room. It's like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom, iPhone, 3 minutes, no one knows what I was doing in there, I'm back to business. And yet over the course of time, we start to drift from intimacy with a partner. And it becomes so easy, becomes so convenient that everything else seems like this Herculean task. There have been studies that are showing that teenage boys are having less and less sex these days. This generation is the least sexed generation, even more so than the greatest generation. And the reason for it is because of access to porn. So on one side of things, teenage pregnancies are down, but the bad news about that is like boys are isolating and jerking off all the time because it's just so easy. They're not even getting out there to connect with others. Men are facing these same challenges. And if we can't bring ourselves to stop, then, one of the things that I encourage men to do and I teach men to do is to take a temporary abstinence period to just kind of break that and understand, okay, like to reset, like why is porn got such a grip on me? We can go deep down this path in a few minutes if like anyone wants to talk about porn, because I get a lot of questions about that. And a few more. Do you feel conflicted about the porn you watch, but you can't seem to stop? This is a big one, right? Like maybe I'm masturbating to certain fantasies. There's certain porn that I'm watching that like I need now to get me off because I'm desensitized to other stuff, but I don't feel so great about it when I'm finished watching it for whatever reason. And I can't seem to stop. What's up with that? Emily Nagoski, who was the woman who I was interviewed with on NPR, she was also written up in the book called Boys and Sex that I've now referenced 3 times. And one of the things that she teaches us is that our bodies many times respond to what's sexually relevant, not necessarily what we desire morally or in alignment with our values. Our bodies respond to what's sexually relevant, not necessarily what we desire morally or in alignment with our values. And let me really make this distinction clear. You can get aroused in situations that are totally offensive to you. Rape survivors have reported being lubricated. It's not because they've enjoyed it. It's because there's a natural body response to that. Men can be aroused because there's some sexual image that connotates a sexual situation, even if it's deplorable. But the way that porn works right now, it's kind of like filtering a lot of stuff to you that you may not want to watch, but it just pops up on the screen. You hit play and all of a sudden you find yourself, okay, I'm going to go down this path. And you fantasize to it, you find yourself getting off to it. And then all of a sudden you've anchored now a desire. And it's creating internal conflict around, shit, I don't feel good about that. But now I keep going back to it over and over and over again. That's how we end up going down the path of feeling conflicted by the porn we're watching. And again, if we want to break that behavior, we have to create a little bit of an abstinence period, and we can talk more about that in a minute. The question from Stacy is does watching a lot of porn lead to sex addiction? So let me answer this let me answer this thoughtfully. So Stacy, I spent this is something that I debated whether or not to go into, and I didn't lead with it up front because I didn't know where the conversation was going to take us. But one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about talking about this is because my journey took me to 4 years of Sex Addicts Anonymous recovery between 2013 and 2017. Because every area of my life, I was disciplined, I had integrity. And when it came to sex, behind the scenes, it was the one thing I didn't have control over. I could not keep a commitment to myself. I'm going to stop watching porn. And then I would watch porn. I'm going to not masturbate today. And then I would continue to masturbate. I could not figure out how to short circuit that trajectory. And eventually I ended up going into Sex Addicts Anonymous for a period of 4 years where I learned things like a sexual inventory, where I went through therapy, where I resolved in a lot of the guilt and shame from my religious upbringing and from my parental upbringing. Lots of the men, and I went to 4 years of weekly Sex Addicts Anonymous meetings. On Sunday mornings, every Sunday morning. And there were a lot of men that were in there who had difficulty with porn. What I have learned in my work in interviewing sex addiction therapists and reading a lot on the subject and from my own personal experience is it's not porn that causes sex addiction. It's not porn that causes it. There's underlying issues that manifest in a sex addiction that porn can be a part of the problem. So for example, eating disorders, alcoholism, gambling disorders, drug addictions, these are all manifestations of underlying unmet needs or pains or traumas. And sex addiction is another one of those areas that people seek to numb or to escape feelings that are going on inside of them. And porn can be a catalyst for that. One of the things that I did when I entered Sex Addicts Anonymous was I took a porn abstinence period. They basically said, if you're going to be in Sex Addicts Anonymous, then no porn. And for a period of 4 years, I didn't watch any porn for 4 years. That was not a problem for me. For 4 years, I didn't masturbate. That was one of the things they also asked me to curtail or to give up. And that was a challenge every single day. That was difficult for me. For some guys, it's the reverse. It's kind of like masturbation. They could kind of get away with, but porn is something that they anchored their emotional energy around. So when I get asked a question like this, I want to be really mindful because porn is being villainized for almost everything. I have a podcast where I talk about porn and say there is a time and a place for porn. It can offer lots of different opportunities for people to explore desire. But I am a strong proponent of knowing why you watch porn, recognizing how it makes you feel when you're done watching it. Do you feel like that was do I feel gutted? Do I feel empty? Do I feel numb? Do I feel gross with myself, or it was like, that was actually, that was exhilarating. And then also, do you know where the porn is coming from? Or do you feel good about the working conditions? Because it's almost like, how we used to buy Nike shoes or clothes from the Gap before we found out that lots of the stuff was, not sourced well. It was, made by child labor. It was, like when we started buying natural foods where people where farms took care of their animals versus like those factory farms, like we demanded to know the supply chain. And if you were to actually look at the porn supply chain, it's mostly disgraceful. And I've done this through interviews with adult film stars who are at the top of the business and have exposed a lot of this. So porn does have a place, but you definitely need to know like how it makes you feel. Do you know why you're watching it? And do you know where it's sourced? And porn is not the boogeyman that creates, sex addiction and all these problems. It can be a symptom though. So thank you for asking that question, Stacy. And if anyone else has any other questions about sex addiction or anything else that's coming in, please pop them in and we'll jump back. All right. Question number 6 would be, do you feel guilty, shameful, or bad about yourself after masturbation or sex? And again, if that's the case, I would encourage you to go back and do the sexual inventory. It's a fantastic way to kind of see those events that maybe anchored that in there. And then finally, there we go. For men, have you ever had a substantive conversation about sex when you weren't horny? And this one I learned from a sex addiction therapist and an author. His name is Dr. David Lay. And he wrote a number of books called Ethical Porn for Dicks. He wrote, by the way, that's the book that lost me all of my keynote speaking gigs, because I sent an email out about that book and that was the thing that terminated my contract. He wrote a book called Ethical Porn for Dicks. He wrote a book called The Myth of Sex Addiction. We had some great conversations about that. And he said that most men don't think or talk about sex unless we're horny. And so to talk about sex, like in a situation like this, where presumably you're not horny, is actually like a really powerful way to get reflective around habits, behaviors, patterns, desires, and needs. So take a screenshot of this, take a look, or maybe you can refer back to the to the replay later on. I would encourage you to answer some of these questions. They're great journal exercises, especially as we're in quarantine right now. This is a time to get reflective. All right, I'm going to move on to this next section. And like I said, anytime, pop a question in. And I'll reiterate here, men need to have better conversations about sex. So one of the things that I've done to champion having better conversations about sex, and I want to make you aware of some of the resources I have available, is I run this website with my buddy Brian called doinnerwork.com. And Do Inner Work is a much bigger conversation for men who are looking to live a purpose-driven life, to optimize their performance physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and to live a life of passion, right? To be lit up by the life that they're living. And a big part of passion is understanding sexual desire, optimizing your libido. And so one of the things that we've done is, to get the word out, is we created this podcast called the Great Man Within Podcast, where we talk openly about all of those subjects I just mentioned. And I wanted to pull out a few episodes around some of the topics of sexuality that we've done that you could use and you could dive into. So I would encourage you to either take screenshots of this, listen to them later. These are some of our most popular episodes on sex and sexuality. If anything that I'm saying here tonight is triggering a deeper conversation for you that you want to go deeper in. And it's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So here are 3 episodes you may enjoy. To talk about porn, there's an episode here on the left with Lisa Ann called What the Porn Industry Doesn't Want You to Know. Now, Lisa Ann is one of the top 10 most downloaded porn stars in the world. She spent 25 years acting in the business. She's now out of the business. She's a personal friend of mine who I've gotten to know over the last 4 years. And she has exposed some of the things that are going on behind the scene in the porn industry that is causing men to consume more and more porn that is not necessarily helpful for us, that is not healthy for us, and how you are being manipulated to watching more and more troublesome porn. and how the porn industry is owned by a monopoly called MindGeek in Canada. Long story short, listen to this episode. It will make you rethink how you watch porn and also get you to start thinking about workers' rights and issues, because too many women are being dragged into the business, chewed up and spit out, and having their reputations destroyed, in many cases physically harmed. And if we're guys watching porn without understanding the supply chain, we are actually voting with our dollars to continue that behavior. So that episode with Lisa was really super popular. This episode about 5 ways to last longer in bed, that's a picture of me and my buddy Brian. I don't put us up there as pillars of lasting longer in bed. I just didn't know what picture to put up there. That is one of the most popular downloads for guys who are like, hey, how do I use breathing techniques? And how do I use like conscious communication strategies to last longer in bed? And I borrow a lot of the wisdom from a book that I'll reference later called The Multi-Orgasmic Man, that teaches Taoist practices, sexual yoga practices on how to last longer in bed. And this stuff is game changing for you. The most popular podcast that we had over the COVID era is this one with Alexa Martinez called Keeping Sex and Desire Burning. A few quick other ones are 5 ways to men lose credibility with women. That was like really powerful. Guys, the one in the middle, How to Keep Your Dick Healthy with Dr. Amy Killen, was super popular. It was like in our top 5 for the longest time until like our listenership really started to grow. And this is one that has a lot of the questions around the physical things that you can do to make sure that like your dick stays strong, morning wood, the foods that you can eat, the foods you want to avoid, so that you can like continue to feel at your best. And some of the treatments that are available, new wave treatments to make sure that your libido stays strong. And this Inside Secrets from a women's sex and intimacy coach with Blair Lindsay is a really thoughtful and spiritual discussion around how to connect with women at a deeper level. The last thing I'll share with you that I think you might find funny. I bet you can't guess what our #1 most downloaded episode, the topic is about. And we run again, a podcast for men about purpose, performance, and passion, a lot about sexuality. The #1 most downloaded episode by far is on the menstrual cycle. Not kidding you. We did an episode with these 2 brilliant women, Alexandra and Shawnee from the Red School. And we did this episode called A Man's Guide for the Menstrual Cycle. What Alexandra and Shawnee do is they teach women how to organize the energy of their lives around the 4 seasons of their cycle: winter, spring, summer, and fall. And what I found out was that when I reached out to them, I said, hey, like this is a big part of a woman's life that men know nothing about. Most guys, we kind of just say, all right, like I know you're bleeding and I'm going to stay away from that. Most guys think it's just an inconvenient thing. So many guys have been taught that it's like, stay away. And as men who are holding ourselves up to a higher standard, who are actively interested in going deep and being intimate with our feminine partners, if we have feminine partners, then we would want to know more about this, one of the most central things that many women experience over the course of their lives if you're still in the cycle phase. And so what we did was we had this conversation. We turned out we were the first men who ever reached out to them to have this conversation with them. And they structured the conversation for us in a way where they said, here are the 4 seasons: winter, spring, summer, fall. Here are times where women are typically feeling much more extroverted, energized, energetic, maybe in spring and summer. When it comes fall and winter, might want to come more inward on themselves and might not be so interested in spontaneous sex or crazy sex, but maybe need more nurturing and loving. And here's what we need from our men during each of these seasons. They actually gave us a bit of an idea and a prescription for each of the seasons. And what couples found by listening to this episode, it turned out a lot of men and women listened to this episode together. Many women found they were shocked how little they knew about the seasons of their cycle, how it affected energy, how it affected their sexual desires, and being able to share that with their masculine partners. It was like a game changer for them. So now couples who have been together for like decades are starting to have more spontaneous sex or intimate sex or nurturing sex. Guys know what what they can do to be space holders and to create environments that their partner want to step into. And women now know how to communicate this to their partners more effectively as well. So I wanted to leave that with you because this episode turned out to be one of the most surprising. Like this number one episode, the second most downloaded episode has half as many downloads as this one. And what that really said to me was more men and women are keen to have these conversations with one another that we've typically not broached for way too long. So let me see, there's a couple of things here in the chat box. Okay. I just see a word here that says masturbation. I'm sure that has something to do with something that I said earlier, but that's a little bit out of context right now. Okay, and Wes Richards. Wes, you had your hand up, man. I'm sorry. Are you still here, my friend? And do you still have a question or something you want to add? Okay. Wes, if you ever come back, man, we've got you. So the last place that I want to leave, because we got about, another 10 or 15 minutes before we wrap this thing up, is this big question around, like, why is sex a performance for men? Why do we label it as a performance? And one of the things that we started to recognize in having conversations with men about this is, like, from an early age, most of us learned about sex through watching porn, and porn is referred to as performance. And we started to learn that men, in these porn videos have dicks of a certain size, have stamina, they are always pleasing their partners. Their partners are just going crazy with how excited and how amazing it is and how athletic they are, picking women up and throwing them all over the place. And there's 3 women and 4 women that can satisfy everything. And then that's not the reality for a lot of guys, like in their first sexual experiences. And the only basis of comparison, though, because a lot of young men are fumbling around with this in their own bedroom, maybe, lurking around, like trying not to get discovered by parents. Like for years, your only basis of comparison is what you see in the porn world, right? Now, I remember when I was a kid, baseball was my favorite love, right? I was like 8 years old. I loved playing baseball. I loved watching the New York Yankees. I could watch greatness with Don Mattingly on the field, and I could see what like major league performance looked like. But I also knew what 8-year-olds looked like when I went out and played with other 8-year-olds in baseball, kids who couldn't swing the bat. And so I had some basis of comparison around kids my own age. But when it comes to sex, because it's such a private thing, we look at like the experts, the pros, who are not really demonstrating intimate sex. It's just like, a performance, and it's not realistic. It's not, but it's the thing that like we hold to as the standard. So that becomes problematic, and that becomes the basis oftentimes for why we discover sex, why we claim sex as a performance. And I'm going to go through a slide here in a moment that shows you kind of the different ways that men look at sex as a performance and how we can break free from that. But first, I see that Wes is back. So Wes, do you have a question or a reflection that you want to add in here before we go to the next slide?
No, actually, back when I raised my hand there was when you were talking to the other guys. And actually, I can't even remember what I was going to say, but I know, a little bit of it was about how I related to your experience of waiting for marriage and believing that you'd actually go to hell, and just relating to that. And actually, I was a lot older, not a lot older, but I was older than 20. When I first had a partner of any sort. So at the time, like back when you were asking for input from guys, I was just gonna raise my hand and kind of mention that I related to that. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, that it was something that like you waited on a little bit later in life.
Yeah. And the other thing it brought up for me was when you mentioned one of the questions we can ask ourselves is about peak experiences. And when I posed that question to myself, I realized I don't have any. Like, I got married shortly after the first time, and so I've had, to this day, like sexuality is still a huge topic for me that I'm trying to figure out in my life to figure out how it fits into my spirituality and figure out how it fits into me evolving and that kind of thing. And it's still a big topic of therapy where I can't get over, you know, where I am now in my marriage, because we've been in kind of a largely sexless marriage for the vast majority of it. And so I have no peak experiences, and it's very it plays a number on your head, and that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah man,
That's
I feel
really
you.
all I was going to share. But
And listen, man, like I applaud you for speaking so openly and candidly about that. And I appreciate the fact that you're on the path of doing discovery and you're in therapy around this. I will recommend a few of these books here at the end. Like the one book that I would say is a must is The Erotic Mind by Dr. Jack Morin. You'll see it in a few minutes here, but like I would say, yeah, like in terms of a comprehensive guide to understanding sexuality, blockages, hangups, it's a great place to start. And then, you know, there's just hearing you talk a little bit about like, how does it remedy with my spirituality? There's probably some other areas that you may want to go deeper into later, but I would say the first book to give you kind of like the comprehensive overview of places you can start. And they have some quizzes in the book too, that could probably crack open some thinking. I would think that's a great place for you, man.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. We got some chats in here. Yeah. I love this honesty. Thank you for being so vulnerable. You know, what can you recommend to couples who have a sexless marriage? Is there any hope to improve? So I haven't been married and I haven't gone through the, by the way, Wes, you're getting a lot of love here. So like you can see, and I would love men to understand this. Like when men do this inner work, when men step into this space and open up and are honest about this stuff, like women have been incredible supporters. And I just keep finding that over and over and over again. So for whatever that's worth for you. Okay. The question about sexless marriage, again, like I'm not married. I haven't been married. So I can't speak from personal experience. I'm not a sex coach. So I would want to leave this in the hands of some of the experts, and the experts would be Dr. Jack Morin, who wrote the book, The Erotic Mind. Esther Perel is a name that I would love to just drop in the chat. Well, actually, can someone, I know someone here knows Esther Perel. Esther Perel is fantastic. Please drop her name in the box here too. You know, she talks a lot about, one of her books is called Mating in Captivity. And actually there's a slide I have here later on that we're not going to get to, but her book, Mating in Captivity, talks about how intimacy requires closeness and desire requires distance. Intimacy requires closeness, desire requires distance. Dr. Jack Morin also writes about this in The Erotic Mind. And what that means is like, if you want to be intimate and close, then it does require a certain kind of a bringing together, a knowing of each other. But at the same time, that closeness, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, also can dissolve a lot of the chemistry, the fire, the desire. And Dr. Morin writes about this, Esther writes about this. And so she goes, so the big conundrum is, and then in this world where we've decided to partner up and marry and live with one another and share everything and become more like each other, how do we create the conditions where there's now friction and polarity and magnetism? And she said, you know, the first step in that is actually to understand that you never own the other person. Just because they're your husband or wife or partner, you do not own them. At the very best, you rent them with the right to renew. And once you stop like looking at someone else as your entitlement, as your right, that you own them, it creates an energetic distance first and foremost. And then to start to cultivate some individuality, because like at one point in time before you became married, there was you, there was them, you didn't know each other, you were an individual. And then when you come together over the course of time, you become similar, you organize your lives around each other, and then you become this cohesive blob where it's like, I don't know where I start and finish and the other person starts and finish. And that can really depolarize a relationship. So Esther has some really, really powerful techniques and conversations about how to create magnetism in a relationship where that's long-term. And I would say go to her for sure.
And I'm just going to add here as just sort of a precursor, not to get everyone too excited. We're actually working on getting Esther Perel as one of the speakers on one of our monthly calls. She's not available, to come out live to Long Island, but it's been great since the world has transitioned to Zoom. She might actually be doing something for us either over the summer or later in the year. So Dominick will definitely send you an invite because we'd love to hear that. And I'll also add, there's so much beautiful vulnerability. Once you get through this piece, I am going to pause or stop recording. So if anybody wants to just kind of ask questions, we'll have it and we'll unmute everyone so we can have a more open discussion about it, because I know you've been directing a lot of questions at men specifically, and I'm sure women have a lot to chime in and ask you about also. I'm sure there are strategies we can all use to, we're all appreciating the openness that's here to elicit more of that from the men in our lives. I know that's a question on my mind, and it would be great if I'm sure other women have that too. So I'll let you finish up with the performance aspect, and we can have a good discussion here.
So, okay, I'll hit this really quickly and then we'll make sure that we have time for questions. So, this conversation about performance, we want to really shift from guys, like from looking at sex as a performance, because when we look at sex as a performance, I want to give you like the rungs of a ladder of where this shows up in terms of like the quality of sex that we have. So when we're talking about sex as a performance, we're stuck in the me state. We're concerned with me, like the outcome of how did I perform? Did I get off? Did I please her? Did I show up well? Did I have stamina? Was I strong? Was I hard? When we're thinking about me, like we're thinking about sexual performance, we're all in the me stage, right? It's like really all about us. And then what happens is I start to see guys then kind of say, okay, well, I'm not going to make it about me. I'm just going to make it about her. I'm going to make it about you. And I see women doing this too, where it's kind of like, oh, I'm just going to tend to your needs. I'm going to please you. And I see a lot of guys consumed with making her orgasm. I'm going to make you orgasm. I'm going to make you orgasm, which is really kind of more about controlling the other person. It's not really so much about connecting with the other person. So like, I call this kind of like below the line behavior is when we're thinking about sex as a performance. We're either like consumed with me and getting what I want, what I need, or how I look and feel. Sometimes the shadow side of me, and I've seen this with women, is consumed with me about how do I look? Do I look good in this light, or do I look, how does my body look? Like maybe there's some body shame around that, and like the me can end up in that area where you disconnect from your partner because it's about that. And these aren't judgments. These are just kind of like awareness conversations to say, like, where have you been having sex from? Like what's the come from when you're having sex? Is it about, me and the outcome? Is it about like, making sure that you feel really good so that like I then feel good, which is, all that can sometimes be in control. It's not necessarily about what's best for us, right? Like, what about us? What about connecting with the other partner? And, I kind of jokingly put this performance line. It's like below the line is really where performance lives, but above the line is really about us, connection, meaningful intimacy. Losing your erection really can't happen above the, it can't happen below the line. Like when you lose your erection, then you didn't perform well. When you ejaculate too early, you blew it. You didn't satisfy me or you, right? Like it's, you screwed up. But when you're really concerned with like, how do us create connection, then we can actually joke around or have like meaningful conversations when we go soft, or the thing that once turned us on no longer does, or we pop off too early. When the come from is about connection, not racing to an outcome, not about controlling someone else's sexual experience, then it opens up the entire world of potential sexual experiences with one another. So I would just encourage you to take a look at where your come from is, sexually speaking. And when you're concerned about me or controlling someone else's sexual experience, that's where you're in performance. And when you're above the line, when you're really like setting a stage for you and your partner to connect, that's where you can explore. That's where you can start to express desires and fantasies that maybe otherwise would be unspoken. And that's where like you can have some mess ups or things that are like uncomfortable moments that you guys can laugh about and get to know each other better on a deeper level and reduce some of the, you know, the guilt, the shame, and other stuff that comes with it. So with that, I think that's all of the prepared comments that I have here. And yeah, and Veronica, I'll kind of bounce it over to you to see how we want to handle the remainder of this, whatever time we have left.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm actually going to, let's see, reclaim host here, and I'm going to unmute everyone. If you want, you can stay muted, but I want to unmute everyone so everyone can say a major, major thank you, first of all, to you for this awesome content. As soon as my, you know, whole thing will act. All right, here we go. So first of all, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a rock. In case that wasn't clear. I think this is probably the most intimate discussion we've had. I know, and let me just stop the recording here.